Hello, everybody. This is Terence Moore for Terence's Take for the week of January 7th, 2019. I almost said 2018. But, you know, this is Terence's Take. But, you know, I got somebody here that's got something else called Tate's Take. DeShaun Tate. How's it going, DeShaun?
Outstanding, Terence. Thank you so much for having me. I like that. Got a nice ring of the bell to it. Terrence's Take. I like that. Tate's Take and Terence's Take.
Yeah, I like both of those things. And I tell you, you guys are in for a treat today because DeShaun is the basketball expert. College basketball in particular, but he knows NBA. He knows everything. He knows Russian hockey too, probably, and basketball, I should say, right? You know all that stuff.
I don't know if I go that far, but that also has a good ring to it, just as long as you don't ask me too many questions about it.
Yeah, I understand.
I'll take the title.
And you're over at 92.9 The Game here in Atlanta, Georgia. We're both here in Atlanta, Georgia. But here's the main thing you need to know about DeShaun. He's from the state of Michigan, which means that he is a diehard Central Michigan Chippewa. Is that right?
Fire up chips.
Yeah. Or maybe Western Michigan with the Broncos.
And Bronco Busters.
And the Eastern Michigan, what are they? Are they the
Hurons? The Eagles.
The Eagles?
The Eagles.
But they used to be the Hurons.
Did they really? That? I'm not sure. I didn't know that.
That's right. But it has something to do with Native Americans. So they said, well, we need to get out of this. And what are they called now?
Well, I'll tell you what about whether the Eagles, but I'll tell you the familiarity about who I really like. And it has some similarity to Eastern Michigan.
Okay.
It's the color scheme. You got the green.
Yeah.
And you got the white.
Okay, so
Sparty party.
Oh, that's exactly right. You're one of them people.
Yeah, I'm one of those.
Yeah, and well, you know, Michigan State is actually doing pretty good, and I want to get into that, by the way, because you know the thing is about college basketball nowadays. It is wild and crazy. 'Cause, you know, right now you look at the AP top 5 or 6. Well, let's go to the AP top 5. You got Duke number 1. You got Michigan. You probably know something about Michigan.
A little bit.
You got Tennessee. You got Virginia. You got Gonzaga. That's the top 5. Michigan State is just outside the top 5. Now get this. In the coaches poll, they've got Virginia number 1, Duke number 2, Tennessee 3. Tennessee's 3 in both polls. Michigan 4, and Michigan State number 5. Now here's the thing, DeShaun. I thought it was interesting that on ESPN just mentioned earlier on this particular evening that there was a fans poll, and they asked the fans, who do you think is number 1 between Duke, Michigan, Tennessee, and Virginia? They didn't mention Michigan State. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
But if you just let's just roll with the ESPN. Sure. If you just go by what ESPN says, between Duke, Michigan, Tennessee, Virginia, what say you as to number 1?
My opinion, or who I think the fans vote?
I'm gonna go with this is Tate's Take. All right, which is part of Terence's Take today. But for Tate's Take, who is number 1 out of that group, the 4?
I got to go with the Michigan Wolverines. And here it is. I'll tell you why.
Now you're not biased because you were born and raised in Detroit.
Well, let me tell you this much, okay? I'm everything state of Michigan.
Okay.
When it comes down to Tigers, Red Wings, Lions, Pistons, but I draw the line with my collegiate team.
Okay.
Because I'm everything Michigan, but I'm not Wolverines by any stretch of the imagination. So we're going on record. This is
but you know what? Come to think of it, it would have to be that way because if you're a Sparty guy,
you can't be both.
Yes, exactly.
And it kills me when people say, you know, I'm Michigan football, but I'm Michigan State basketball. No, it doesn't work that way.
I like that.
No such thing.
Yeah, there you go.
But as you know, in this business, you can't be biased.
That's right.
And right now, I think Michigan is playing probably the most impressive basketball. Now, do they have necessarily the most impressive resume? Probably not. Up until about 2 weeks ago, or just before the Christmas break, they did. But you know, at the end of the day, I think they're playing the best basketball, you know, in the country right now. And I know that, you know, maybe Duke has something to say about that, but they have a loss up underneath their belt.
Sure.
And Virginia, you know, they're undefeated as well, so they can make a case. And, you know, to Tennessee, you know, they may feel that way. They're playing some of the best basketball in the country, arguably, but they have a loss under their belt to Kansas as well. And, you know, Gonzaga's got 2 losses under theirs. So, you know, at the end of the day, I feel like, you know, for a team that's undefeated and beat a Purdue team that was ranked at the time by 20, the defending national champions at Villanova, Michigan beat them by 30. And there's another team in there, I can't think of who it was right now, but they beat them by 20 as well, North Carolina, and beat them by 20 as well in Ann Arbor. So when you're just kind of looking at it, it's hard to go against that. You have a Hall of Fame coach in John Beilein. You have a good balance between offense and defense. One of the best defensive teams in the country. I would definitely say, if not top 3, for sure, top 5 from a statistical standpoint. They've got scores, they got guards, depth, bench, bigs. Wings, you name it, all across the board, they've got it. And they're just coming off of a national championship game. So they are one of the few teams in the country, one of the very few teams in the country that where they last left off at last year, regardless of what they lost, seniors, guys that left early, whatever the case may be, they look like they picked up where they last left off at, even though they lost to the best team in the country in Villanova.
Right.
But they made a phenomenal run all the way through the Big Ten Conference tournament and went on and won 5 games in the NCAA tournament. Even though they lost, they picked right back up this year, and they look like that they haven't skipped a beat.
Well, I'm saying, you mentioned, too, that they beat North Carolina, and they almost made Roy Williams cry.
Yeah, I know.
That's always a good thing, because I'm not a North Carolina fan nor a Roy Williams fan, but that's a whole other matter. And you know what, DeShaun, when we talk about this, with all these different teams in the mix, even like a Tennessee, there's a guy that nobody talks about, Rick Barnes. That guy's a hell of a coach. Look at every place he goes, he wins, right?
Well, I've been hearing quite a bit about Rick Barnes over the last couple weeks, and I know maybe he feels like he's one of the more disrespected coaches, or maybe not necessarily getting the recognition that he deserves.
Right.
I'm not a Rick Barnes guy. I must say I'm not a Rick Barnes guy, but let me make sure I say this first, is that you can't take it.
It's got something to do with the NCAA tournament, I'm sure, right?
Well, not just the NCAA tournament, but when you sit back and you look at the kind of talent that he has had when he was over at Texas. It's almost as if this guy has been stealing more money than Floyd Mayweather. Ooh. He put himself in a position when you're getting guys like, and everybody thinks, oh, Kevin Durant, that's the obvious. When you start talking about LaMarcus Aldridge and guys like we can go back so many. DJ Augustine is another one of those guys, and
sure.
PJ Tuckers and Tristan Thompsons and Damian James and Corey Josephs, and we could talk about some of the best talent that they've been able to get, and he hasn't been able to achieve.
Let's play devil's advocate for a little bit. This guy coached at Clemson,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Clemson is. You talk about basketball.
Right.
Clemson. Everybody's talking about all warm and fuzzy about the football team right now.
Sure.
But when's the last time that Clemson had a decent basketball program on a consistent basis? This guy was able to win at Clemson.
Right, I agree with that. But where I'm getting at is, in the same token, what did he do at Clemson?
Yeah.
And he wasn't getting the kind of talent. But as you grow, the more money that I feel like, the more money that you're paid, and the more you win at a specific program, you go on to another program and you do what? You win. And so I feel like he did that, and he got better players, recruited better, a lot of that good stuff. But he didn't necessarily win the way I feel like he should have won. There was a particular year, and I can't remember when this was. I want to say maybe, let's go 2009, for example. Okay. Let's just say somewhere right around that time. And Texas was a team that started out, they were nationally unranked in the country to begin the season, the preseason polls, and then they got all the way up to number 1. And by the time they got all the way up to number 1, probably midway through the season, three quarters of the way through the season, they ended up dropping out of the top 25 before the NCAA tournament, ended up losing in the first round. And that was with a pretty good team at that time. So, as much talk as there is maybe about Rick Barnes or lack thereof, I'm not taking anything away from Rick Barnes as far as being a slightly above average coach, but failing to meet the expectations, depending on what those expectations are at whatever specific program that it is. Because you look at it, you compare a Tennessee to a Texas.
Sure. Texas,
you might be able to get extended a little bit more because of the fact that it's a football program, so the urgency to win on the basketball side maybe not as deep.
Exactly. Versus
where you are, it's the same thing at Tennessee. Same thing it was at Clemson. I would be really interested to find out what would happen if he was the head coach in his tenure at a specific program that has higher expectations in the need to win.
Well, let me ask you about this. Moving on from Rick Barnes, is that you look at what we've established so far with all these various teams and various spots in both the coaches poll and also the AP poll. It kind of looks like in the early going that this is going to be a very wild and crazy year in college basketball. Is that what you see right now?
It will. And it's only going to get crazy. That's the funny thing is I told someone last year, and I went on air live to say this, and I said, I'm not 100%, I'm not 110% positive if we're going to see a 16 beat a 1. But I do think that we're close to seeing it. And I think that we're a lot closer to seeing it than a lot of people recognize. And I think that if it does happen, and at this point you didn't know exactly who the 1 seeds were going to be, but you had a good feeling, especially if it's a team that had only lost 1 or 2 games all season, like a Virginia, who got the number 1 overall seed. And I said, if it happens, I got a good feeling that it could happen this year. And if it happens to a team, then it's going to be Virginia. And sure enough, here comes almighty UMBC and took them down. But that just goes to show that year by year, because of the parity and because a lot of these teams that are prestigious programs, your UCLAs, your North Carolinas, Duke, so on and so forth, Kentucky, Kansas, they're getting younger and younger. And even though the expectations to win are high because of the load of talent that they have, what comes down to in March is one thing you got to pay attention to. Now, this is a free space on the bingo card, so kind of keep this to hopefully this will you'll be able to remember this. But when you start looking and filling out those brackets in March, you got to look at these teams that are senior-led teams, got experience, upperclassmen, fifth-year seniors, all those type of things make a huge difference.
Did you do that on purpose, by the way?
What's that?
You said senior and bingo, and like in the same.
I can't say that I have, but I admire how quick you are on your feet on that. I'll say that much. But those are the things that you got to think about when you're filling out those brackets, and that's why you see so many upsets. And guys are just getting these rosters are getting younger and younger. I mean, we're looking at Duke right now. They got number 1, number 2, number 3 ranked players in the country between Zion, Cam Reddish, and R.J. Barrett, and number 10 ranked player in the country coming in. They're starting with Trey Jones. They're starting 4 freshmen right now.
Wow.
And I think that they're probably the youngest team probably in college basketball, considering they don't go very deep. And although that's one of my concerns about them when the tournament rolls around. But you have to consider those things as well when you're talking about how far some of these teams can go and what's ahead from them from a dangerous standpoint when you're approaching March Madness.
Well, I want to get back to Duke a little bit later on, but you mentioned another team, Virginia, and I tell you, Virginia, oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a team that gets a lot of play, and then all of a sudden it's like they do nothing at the end. Now, and everybody's talking about how athletic they are now compared to the past. To me, this looks like the same old Virginia. This is a Virginia of Ralph Sampson. This is way before your time here, but
I'm familiar with the Chaminade and
exactly. So I mean, it's just like if you want to go broke, people, put your money on Virginia. Am I mistaken on this or not?
You are this year.
I am.
You are this year.
So you're buying this Virginia hype now?
Let me say this: I'm not one to give I come across a lot of people. I meet a lot of people, and they say, "Who's in your Final Four? Who you got in your Final Four?" We're midway through. There's no more football. You've had a half of a season to think about this. We're 2 months removed, and we got 2 months to go. Who's in your Final Four? And I say, you know what? A lot of this stuff you just don't know until those brackets come out. You got to see those matchups and the way that some of these seedings and these teams are paired.
Brackets are everything. True.
But if I had to, and this is if I had to, there's one team that I have in mind right now that I'm willing to almost put
don't say Virginia. Don't say Virginia.
I'm willing to put all the chips on the table to make it to the Final Four, not to win a national championship, but to make it to the Final Four, and that team is Virginia.
Unbelievable.
That team is Virginia. I think that I think that there's too much emphasis being put on what happened last year with losing to a 16 seed, and a lot of
DeShaun,
emphasis
it's not just last year.
But
we're talking about
leading
over
up to
decades. This has been going on forever.
Leading up to, and I'm not talking about winning a national championship, but I do think that they're a Final Four team. Tony Bennett does a very good job with his team. Now, the very unfortunate part, and where they're going to run into a lot of trouble, much like last year, is first of all, they do slow you down to play their style brand of basketball. They're a defensive team, and if they're okay, if the final score of the game is 7-6, they're good with that. They're cool with making you play their style, slowing everything down, half court sets, and bruising you up front. But their problem is if there's a team that gets up by about 10 points on them, it's hard Virginia to come back and to score the basketball, because that's not the way that they play. I think things are going to pan out to be a little bit different, because they're also a little bit, maybe not a lot of it, but they're a little bit better on the offensive end, and they've got some experienced guys and some guys that know what it takes, and they got a chip on their shoulder, deservingly so. They lost to a 16.
Yeah, you know what? When you were describing Virginia, you kind of sound like a team that you and I are quite familiar with here in Atlanta, Georgia. You cover a lot of Georgia Tech Tech football and basketball. I know
Yes.
that. Okay, and Georgia Tech football under Paul Johnson, who just retired, with that goofy little offense they had. With the triple option, it was the same thing. If they're ahead, they were good, but you got behind. Anyway, I'm tired of talking about Virginia. I want to talk about something else. You look at this top 25. There are some really weird. Yeah, you don't remember Johnny Carson, right? Johnny, you remember Johnny Carson?
I can't say that
You
I
probably
do.
heard. Johnny Carson was way before David Letterman. You
Okay.
heard of David Letterman?
I absolutely have.
See, ladies and gentlemen, DeShaun Tate is a young guy here. I'm the old timer, and so some of you guys remember Johnny Carson. And Johnny Carson used to turn to Ed McMahon and say weird, wild stuff. And in the top 25. Top 25, some wild, weird stuff going on here. And I'm going to throw out some teams here. I mean, Mississippi State, did they have a basketball team? Mississippi State is ranked 14th in both polls. How is that possible? What's going on with that?
I'll tell you why. One thing about UCLA, there's no more Steve
Or Mississippi State. We're talking about Mississippi State.
Right. But there's no more Steve Alford at UCLA.
Yeah.
And prior to him coming over there at UCLA, you had Ben Howland, who was a really good coach.
Yeah.
Took UCLA to 3 consecutive Final Fours, and now is over at Mississippi State.
Okay.
So he's now the head coach there, and he's a really good coach. I don't think he gets nearly the what he should be considered as far as the publicity that I think that he deserves. And he's an old school coach, but he knows how to get his guys to play really hard for him. And I think that the Weatherspoon brothers, especially the elder one, Quindary Weatherspoon, does a really good job over at Mississippi State. One of their leading guys, he's a guard. He's really good. If you're not paying attention to Mississippi State, that's just one of those teams that are flying under the radar right now.
But
Actually,
DeShaun,
SEC Player of the Week last week in Eric Holman. That's another guy.
me ask
They
you
don't go very deep, but they are one of the more underrated teams, not in the SEC, but also in the country.
Have you ever been to Starkville, Mississippi?
Never been to Stark Vegas.
Okay. Anyway. So let's move on to, you got Buffalo. I mean, Buffalo is not a surprise anymore. Everybody knows that Buffalo's good. Okay. So that's not all that. But I think it's very interesting. You look in the top 25, you got these blasts from the past. Phi Slamma Jamma.
Houston's in there, undefeated Houston. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, is this Houston team? Are they a throwback to the old days? How does this Houston team compare to with Clyde Drexler and Akeem Olajuwon and those type of guys?
I don't think that they can even compare. I think the only time that you can bring up Phi Slamma Jamma with this team is just because the guys are playing for the same program. And that's it. There's no
same colors, yeah.
Same colors, same program. There's no resemblance. There's no resemblance out there. They're not rolling, the Dream and Clyde out there. They're not rolling the Glide out there.
Are they slamming and jamming?
No, but they're winning games. And there's only 3 undefeated teams that remains in college basketball, and that's Virginia, Michigan, and Houston. And Houston wants their respect, and deservingly so. And I'm gonna tell you exactly why. Remember, we were talking about some of these some of these coaches, like your Ben Howland, some elder statesmen, some guys that are still coaching right now. And it just so happens to be that one of those guys is the head coach for Houston, and that's Kelvin Sampson, and he's doing a phenomenal job. They did a really good job. I mean, they took Michigan all the way down to the wire last year, who made it to the national championship game. We talked about that a little bit earlier.
Right.
And that came down to a buzzer beat. That came down to a last-second shot where a guy from Michigan hit it at the buzzer. I mean, Houston lost Rob Gray from last year, who was Mr. Do Everything for them. They got Chris Davis in there this year. He's running the show, and he's got a pretty good, maybe not any star-studded talent over there. Maybe not any guys that is ever going to suit up and tie shoes and step on the NBA floor in between 94 feet of hardwood. But I will say enough to say that they do have some really good role players that is willing to buy into systems. They are very disciplined, and they're not going to wow you. They're not going to look anything amazing or anything. But at the end of the day, they're going to, as you can see this year, they're going to add a number to the left side of the result column. And that's why they're undefeated. And
you mentioned, and we're going to have you back on this podcast many times in the future. And you mentioned Sampson, for instance, Calvin Sampson. I mean, this guy was involved in all kind of crazy stuff at Indiana. And he's still coaching. We got to talk about that at some point. All these coaches, they come back. And anyway, that's a whole other story. St. John's. St. John's is another team in the top 25. Chris Mullin, he's not out there. Chris Mullin's not going to walk through that door. But apparently he is. Somebody's walking through that door for St. John's.
Yep.
Who is it?
I'm going to tell you who is walking through that door. I think he's the best point guard in the country.
Ooh.
His name is Shamori Pons.
Wow.
There's been some comparisons between him and a few guys, Nick Van Exel being one of them. I don't see as much Nick Van Exel in his game, but I see a little bit of Kemba Walker. He's not afraid of the big lights. He's a New York kid. He bleeds New York and bleeds St. John's, and he's a load. He's a scoring load. Now he may not be your traditional point guard that wants to defer to guys and set up other guys. And I mean, he's not bad from that standpoint. But prototypical point guard, but I would say enough to say that he can score in bunches. So he may be looked at a little bit more as a combo guard, but he plays the point guard position. And I'll put any point guard in the country up against Shamori Pons right now.
Yeah, when you start talking about players in college basketball, there's only one that anybody wants to talk about it, and that is Zion Williamson. Mm-hmm. We're right here in Atlanta, Georgia, and everybody's talking about that the Hawks are winning too many games right now. The Atlanta Hawks, they need to be the worst team in the NBA. And I've said this, DeShaun, before. I've said this on television, on Channel 2. I do Sports Zone. I said that before every Atlanta Hawks game, the organist for the Atlanta Hawks should play that old hymn of the church, Marching to Zion. Okay. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. Come on, sing. We're marching to Zion, that beautiful player from Duke.
For a good reason. Because this is a generational player. I feel like, has the potential, to be a generational player for an organization.
So you're
at the next
qualifying.
level.
Why are you qualifying? I mean, Vince Carter came out today, and Vince Carter flat out said, Vince Carter knows a little something about this. Vince Carter plays for the Hawks, by the way.
Sure.
He's 100 years old.
Yeah.
But Vince Carter said today that right now Zion Williamson is ready to play in the NBA.
I didn't know he said that today, which is a little.
He just said that.
Well,
you don't agree with Vince?
Today, no. This year, sure. And I'm not even going to depend on what you mean when you say ready. I mean, the physical specimen that he is, sure. But the things that first of all, we're just entering conference play. We're 2 games in. Right now, they just took care of Wake Forest. The things that you learn as a freshman and you're 2 games in on conference play, this is the best conference in the country.
Yeah.
Whether that's arguably or inarguably. But the talent is there. You're going to have but you have to go through those growing pains in the conference. And then even in March, win or you go home. And that's one of the problems that I believe that Duke is going to have.
This is unbelievable. So you're not really on that.
Oh, no, I love Zion. Oh, no, I love Zion.
Of Zion?
I love Zion.
Okay.
Zion's, in my opinion, you're silly if you don't take Zion with the number 1 pick in the draft.
Okay.
But I will say this much. When we start talking about ready today, I think there's things that there's lessons that you have to learn. Just picture this. While we were just talking about the Hawks, right? Trae Young. Okay, sure. In the first half of the college basketball season, all God or all American, whatever you want to call it,
right.
Couldn't
at Oklahoma,
just
right?
Nobody. Next Steph Curry, this, that, and the other, call it whatever you want. Nobody saw it coming. I saw it coming, but a lot of people didn't. And the way that his second half of the season looked in comparison to the first, when players started making adjustments,
right,
and you started playing up against older players where they started to be able to adjust to or form in a way to where they were to stop you in a sense.
Right.
Zion, there's some things that Zion is going to have to face. Think about this. You're going to go up to Charlottesville and play against the best defense in the country when you play against Virginia. You're already not a great jump shooter, and you have to go up there and shoot in that Carrier Dome against all that length against a team that nobody plays the zone the way that they do against Syracuse. That's not even talking about the best rivalry in college basketball and everything that's going to come with playing against Chapel Hill in North Carolina.
Sure.
And Florida State's going to throw some good stuff out there. NC State has a really good team this year. Those are the little things I feel that Zion needs to see first before we can start talking about him in the NBA. There's too much emphasis, and this isn't just with Zion.
Right.
And pardon me for getting a little long-winded.
No, that's fine.
But one thing that I don't think that a lot of people are paying attention to is there's too much emphasis being put on these players with potential, because that's what the draft has become about. You stash guys after 3 years and see what they are in 5 years later, or whatever the case may be. There needs to stop being so much emphasis being put on a kid's potential, and instead there needs to be a little bit more geared focus towards
But that's-
evaluation.
But and I know that that's never going to happen. And it's not just in college basketball. I mean, that's the way it is right now throughout sports. It's all about potential.
Absolutely.
You know, Hugh Durham. You probably don't remember Hugh Durham. Hugh Durham is a former basketball coach at University of Georgia back in the 70s and 80s.
Okay.
He used to say potential means you ain't done it yet. Okay. But that's the way we are right now in basketball. You know, sticking with Zion Williamson. No, you look at some of the great phenoms in recent years. Is there anybody that he compares to as far as the hype and at least so far being able to live up to the hype in college basketball history? Because this kid has received a lot of publicity.
Well, let me say that. Let me say this first. I'm definitely going to answer your question, but there was just one last little piece on the question that you just asked me before. I think sometimes we try to, as people, and just by nature, we try to rush into what we think someone is going to be at the next level instead of enjoying what we're seeing out of them in college right now. Now, moving on to the second part of your question.
Wait. Let's look at that. DeShaun, that's very deep.
Well, yeah, I mean, I like to take it there.
Yeah.
I like to take it there. Let's enjoy it.
Wow.
Instead of thinking about, Trae Young, this, that, and the other, next Steph Curry, blah, 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 blah. This guy had 22 assists in a game, not to mention that he scored over 20 points in that same game. We're not appreciating what these guys are doing on the level that they're on right now instead of putting all the pressure on what they're going to be on the next level when they're playing up against guys that do this to feed their families. That's when it becomes something a little different. Now it's a business. But outside of that, in regards to what you were saying is, I haven't seen this, honestly, in my time. I haven't seen this much hype since LeBron James. Now, I don't know how much social media and this and that has to do with it. I'm sure it has a lot. But just in general, even if it wasn't for the social media, just the magazines, the this, the that, just so much talk. And that's everywhere you go.
Because you mentioned Trae Young. Now, Trae Young got a lot of publicity. But, from Trae Young publicity, if Zion is a 10, where would you rank the Trae Young publicity of last year? Because it was pretty high.
No, I definitely think it's a 10. I think Trae Young, I mean, they were cutting in on live NBA games to show Trae Young highlights. And that wasn't Nets versus, Clippers games.
Yes.
Those were LeBron James games that they were cutting in on. I vividly remember they were cutting in on some pretty high games at that time.
And that's why I'd say that the Zion thing is pretty comparable. I mean, pretty similar. Mm-hmm. The only thing is with Zion, everybody's talking about his dunks, okay, and that sort of thing. I mean, they're even it's like a.
I hate that. Yeah, I hate that that's happening. And I'm gonna tell you why. If I may.
Oh, hey, you can. This is Terence's take, but this is also Tate's take at the same time.
First of all, when we were talking about resemblance of players, I do see a little bit of. I see some grandmama. I see some Larry Johnson a little bit.
Wow, that's
I see a little round mound rebound. I see some Barkley in there as well, but with a Julius Randle handle, and he's a natural lefty as well. A guy that can push the ball up the floor, can pass the ball exceptionally well. Now, he's not a great shooter, and there's a lot of guys that are not going to be great shooters. Ben Simmons was not a great shooter. And sometimes it's not meant for everybody to be a great shooter.
Right.
He has to shed a little bit of the pounds. Quite a bit. He's weighing in at about 285
He is pretty chunky.
He is a chunky guy. And he hasn't, one thing that people don't know is he hasn't been healthy prior to this year in like 2 or 3 years of high school. Because there were some injuries and whatnot, and that held him out. But when you saw him hit the floor, he doesn't look like he missed a beat at all. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how much of that catches up to you and whatnot. But going back to what you're saying, a lot of people talk so much about his athletic abilities. And what they're not paying nearly enough attention to is the fact that he does have a skill set. Now, he may not be a great shooter, and he may need to learn some more go-to moves on the offensive end. And he is a little bit more limited than most people may think about if they're not in a transition type situation. A little bit more half-court sets. You're going to see, again, when Virginia starts slowing guys down, Syracuse starts slowing you down, you can't get out in transition, you're going to kind of see a little bit of a different player. You're going to see him struggle like you will all the other freshmen. That's what concerns me about Duke in the tournament. But in terms of Zion Williamson, he gets on the ground after loose balls, creates second chance points, effort points, hustle points. He's the leading shot blocker in the country. He's 6'6". I mean, just the little things, rebounding.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's a man. I've seen him go to the basket, miss a shot, and here comes 4 defenders crowding around him. He missed the shot, grabbed his own rebound, put it back up,
Very
got
impressive.
his rebound, put it back up, got his own rebound, and put it back in again, and before they blew the whistle and called the foul. Now, one thing he's going to have to make sure that he does that's going to be very key this year is make sure, again, another free space on the bingo card. He has to make sure that he's hitting his shots from the charity stripe because he's gonna be feeling a lot of this in the morning. He's gonna get fouled all around the world.
Yeah, we're talking about Zion Williamson of Duke. And, when you look at Duke and you look at that ACC, right now they've got 6. Count them. They've got 6 teams in the top 15.
Mm-hmm.
That is incredible. I mean, the ACC has been strong for many, many years, many decades. Can you make the case that this is the strongest that the ACC has ever been, at least at this point in the season?
You can make the case if you want to, but I think that a lot, when it comes down to the rankings, there's some favoritism towards the ACC a little bit.
You don't think?
I mean, when you're...
Yeah, and you got my friend Dick Vitale.
You can't tell him nothing. He loves the ACC, especially you get him at Cameron Indoor Stadium. You can't tell him nothing. You got to drag him up out of there. But, you're looking at North Carolina. They're playing tonight. North Carolina's 12 and NC State's 15. And, whether NC State deserves to be 15. They're a really good team. They're probably the most underrated team in the conference. But, how good North Carolina is, I'm not really sure if they're within the best 12 teams in the country. Now, do they deserve to be ranked there for right now? Sure. But I'm not sure if they're really one of the best 12 teams in the country right now, regardless of that fact. When you're sitting back and you're looking at it, there's a lot of teams in this conference that are really good, and they're going to beat up on each other, and they'll probably get the most teams that'll get the most bids into the NCAA tournament and all that good stuff. And a lot of them are probably going to make some pretty good runs, deep runs. I told you Virginia, I think they're going to be there. It wouldn't surprise me if I saw Virginia, both and Duke in the Final Four coming out of this conference. That wouldn't surprise anyone. But it also wouldn't surprise me if they both got there and neither one of them cut down the nets while they're standing on the ladders with scissors in hand in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Which reminds me of one thing. The Duke Blue Devils have 5 national championships. If they win this year, that'll make 6 national titles. Twin Cities has been phenomenal to them.
I see where you're going.
They've won 3 national titles in Indianapolis. 91, 91, 2010.
Yep. I was there against Butler. Yep.
And 2015. And their other 2 titles have come in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Wow.
1992 and 2001.
And did you know that?
And they're in Minnesota this year.
That Kennedy's secretary was named Johnson, and Johnson's secretary was named Kennedy. I'm a Kennedy assassination buff. I just had to
I know how you roll.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
There's got to be a tie in there.
Respect.
Yeah, a little bit.
Respect.
But, I want to get you for a couple more things, DeShaun, because, the people out there got to understand that this man that we're talking to right now, the reason he is such a big college basketball fan is he's always watching college basketball. I mean, constantly watching college. And I know that there's tons of games you want to watch right now, okay? And, I mean, like, for instance, what time do you end up finish watching college basketball during the course of a night nowadays?
Well, I almost asked you if we could do this podcast switching seats so I could see the TV behind me, but I didn't want to be the rude guy because I'm thankful to be here.
And he's telling the truth, guys and gals. I mean, he is always watching college basketball.
That is very true. And let me say this first, and I want to get a little bit more personal with it first. Is just the fact that I'll be 35 years old this year, and there's a lot of people, especially young African American guys that are. I can't think of the right word for a stereotype or whatever you want to call it. And they're known for a lot of different things.
Right.
And I just didn't want to be the same kind of statistic. I wanted to do it my way. I wanted to go after what I wanted to go after. And I just didn't want to be labeled with everyone else. I wanted to make sure that if someone had something to say about me, and this is just something that's just kind of been my anchor for me a little bit, that if when someone sees me, if they don't remember nothing else about me when they see my face, if they don't remember my name or nothing else, the very first thing that they think of is he knows college basketball. I know that dude because that's all he lives, breathes, talk, bleeds, you name it. So I say that say I put a lot of time into it. I'm not. People say, when do you I do go to bed at some point, but I never stop thinking about it. I'm thinking about it in my sleep. I know that this is probably a really weird thing for some people, but it's my thing. For some people, it may be shopping. For other people, it may be reading or gambling or whatever the case may be. But mine just happens to be college basketball. I've always fallen in love with it, but I watch it. I watch it every chance that I get. And it's funny that we're talking about this. I had to get a job doing this because any other kind of job that I've had, it's always like, I get pulled into the principal's office and they're like, dude, let me tell you something. Like, you're a great guy. I love you to death. But I can't have you outside of your department walking past people's desks. Talking college basketball. If you're just walking past and mentioning, that's one thing. But I can't just have you standing there just talking. There's no work being done. And so I'm like, at some point I'm gonna have to get into this business. And it just dawned on me. It just, it was like the flip of a switch, if you will. But it gets tough, especially during approaching March Madness. I have a whole like setup, a whole way that I go about it and how I prepare for it. It's funny because my mom, ever since I was a little kid, she's always known there's two times of the year, 2 days of the year that you don't bother him during any other time. And then there may be some other days sprinkled in there as well, but NBA draft and Selection Sunday.
Wow.
Leave them alone. Put my food in the microwave, whatever you need to do, put it on top of the refrigerator, tie it up in a bag, tuck it way in the back so my big brothers, who's much, much bigger than me, don't eat my food. But that's always been my thing. It gets wild on Thursday. The Thursday of the NCAA tournament, I have to say it's probably my favorite day of the year. College basketball game. It's the first day. It's tip off. I don't work on that day. Maybe for myself or whatever. Mm-hmm. But that is my own personal little anniversary date. Games tip off at noon. They don't go off till probably, close to midnight. The last game comes on, maybe usually about a 10:57, 11:57, something like that. And I watch it all the way through. I'm watching the press conferences. I'm breaking it down. I'm writing down the notes. And I feel good about it. Sometimes it's a little stressful, but it's a good stress.
Well, and there's so many other aspects to this, and we're going to have DeShaun back to talk about those other aspects of him being the college basketball expert, which is what he is. And he goes deeper than what you just heard right there. But I want to end with a couple of things here. I mean, first of all, I'm very interested in this Kansas situation. Kansas is 12-2, and people are panicking over this team. Mm-hmm. I mean, they lost to Iowa State. They're 12-2. Mm-hmm. I mean, and they lost a big guy there. I can't even pronounce that.
Udoka Azubuike.
Oh, there you go. So he's a college basketball expert. He can pronounce these names. They lose this guy. He's got a hand injury. He's gone for the year. But this is the same Kansas team that has won the Big 12 for 14 straight years. Mm-hmm. So the question is this going to be the end of the string?
I don't know. If I had to take a guess, I would say no. I'm really weird about certain things, and one of those things is it's show me things. I've got to be shown. Texas Tech has a really good team. They struggle offensively from time to time, but they're one of the best defensive teams in the country. I don't see them being the ones that's knocking Kansas off the perch. I think that Texas has a much better chance to do it than a lot of people think. And Shaka Smart can surprise some people. Now, maybe not so much in conference play necessarily, but it wouldn't surprise me if they made a run in the NCAA tournament, and not only that, but even more so further than Kansas. Another team that Iowa State. We talked about Iowa State, and they beat them as well already.
Exactly.
And Iowa State has had some really, some pretty good teams as well. But I think that there's one team that nobody's really talking about, and they just snuck back into the top 25 after they lost their only game of the season, and that was to Lipscomb early in the year. And that is and that's TCU.
Oh wow.
TCU they have a pretty good team. They're leading the nation in assists. Alex Robinson, who is a transfer from Texas A&M, is leading the nation in assists. We've still got, they've had some hiccups, and there's some things that they still have to figure out. Still some I's that need dotted, T's that need crossed, and wrinkles that need ironing out. But they have a very good team. And if you know anything about about Dixon, about the head coach, Jamie Dixon,
sure,
formerly at Pitt.
Right.
He's got these guys rolling. I mean, they can run. Desmond Bain. I mean, they've got a really good backcourt. Now, a lot would depend on their front court after losing a couple players from last year's team. But they're a really good team. If I had to go anywhere, I'd say Kansas. But I think Kansas is in a little bit more trouble than people, because it has a different feel.
Yes.
However, Bill Self has done an exceptional job at Rock Chalk. But the thing is that it's not just about losing Udoka Azubuike, who was, one of the players that decided to return and spurn the NBA and return from a team that went to the Final Four last year. But there's another guy named Sylvia D'Souza who helped them a lot last year, where he was a freshman and getting
yes.
to the Final Four, and hasn't played a game this season. And that's not because of injuries, but that is more so because of NCAA investigation/infractions. So, it's and they had another guy from last year that never saw the floor either, where there was a similar situation for him as well. So I don't know what Bill Self has cooking in terms of as far as paying players and all that kind of stuff. I can't speak on that necessarily. But I know he has guys sitting, and it's not because, they're injured for the second consecutive year in a row. But he's getting the players. These players are good enough to look past and have time to adjust without Udoka Azubuike and make a run at their 15th consecutive Big 12, conference championship. And that's one of the more, I think, underrated one of the more underrated streaks that there is in sports today. I mean, I really don't think that people understand Skype.
Yeah.
Between Skype and Facebook and HDTV and the DVR, all that stuff was created in 2004. That was the last time Kansas did not win a Big 12 regular season championship.
But the only thing about Kansas, now we're here in Atlanta, Georgia. This Kansas streak reminds me an awful lot about the Atlanta Braves. I mean, the Atlanta Braves hold the Major League record for most consecutive division titles, 14. Ironically, 14, there's that number again. Mm-hmm. You know how many how many world championships the Braves won?
Can I just say 95?
95 won.
That's it. That's the only
and just
one.
like Kansas only won 2008, right?
That's the only one.
And they barely won that one overtime against Memphis. But you know what? I'll tell you something. We're going to continue this conversation, DeShaun and I, because we're going to be at Georgia Tech Wednesday night watching Georgia Tech against Virginia Tech, which is also in the top 10. So what's going to happen in that game?
I think that Georgia Tech has a much better chance at beating Virginia Tech than a lot of people think. Ooh. And here's why. Because of the fact that the defense, now they struggle offensively.
Yeah, and that's an understatement.
And if they could just stay in the game, they don't shoot well from three either, but if they could just stay in the game, I think they can get a chance. If you look at the course of the last couple of years, now granted it helped with Ben Lammers.
Well, hold that thought,
okay.
DeShaun, because we have to have something to talk about tomorrow night, okay?
Okay, let's do it.
Because before the game, we're going to talk about this.
Okay.
And for the people out there, we're going to talk more about all kind of stuff with DeShaun and college basketball.
Let's just say they got a shot.
Goes on.
Let's just say I'm gonna give Georgia Tech a shot.
There you go. And I got to talk to him about my Fighting Irish and my Miami, Ohio Redhawks and all those kind of type of things. But in the meantime, we're gonna see you next week for more Terrence's Take, not to be confused with
Tate's Take. Follow it on Twitter at Tate's Take Sports. TATES. TAKE Sports. If you don't know how to spell sports, I can't help you too much with that.
And you're on 92.9 The Zone. No, 92.9 The Game.
The Game.
Yeah,
the
sorry
game.
about that.
No, it's all good.
The Game.
The Game.
The Game.
The Game.
That's right. And I will see you next week.